This video is sponsored by Ugreen. More on them later. It's another week, and you know what that means. That means that there's another Anbernic device that is going to be released. This is the RG406V. And I actually just got this yesterday. For those of you that, apparently somebody on Twitter or X or whatever you go ahead and call it, they said that they didn't know that I had an account there, despite the little thing popping up, I think over here on this side of the screen. Happens every single time. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and follow me over there to kind of like see the ins and outs of what it is that I'm doing, as well as opinions on things. But when this came in the mail, I immediately wanted to start playing on it and seeing what it could go ahead and do. So this video is more of an impressions video more than a first look, because I haven't had a chance to actually really truly try out a ton of things, but I do have some opinions after like a full 24 hours of kind of just like finagling with it and seeing what I can go ahead and find out. First and foremost, this is a chonky boy, guys. This is a big boy. And I didn't think that it was going to be as big as it looked, because in the images it just looks really swollen up, but when it comes down to it, it just feels like a really chonky boy. And there are pros and cons to that. First and foremost, like a pro is that because of how heavy it is, it feels comfortable in the hands. Like it doesn't feel too heavy like a Legion Go would, but it feels comfortable enough, and I feel like I don't really have to worry about any sort of crazy things, because I'm like, if I were to use the analog sticks, for instance, when I was talking about the R36S, I felt like using the analog sticks on that would make the handheld kind of just fall forward, like it was imbalanced. But because of the weight of the RG406V, it just feels like I don't have to worry about anything. It's just going to work, and I just feel comfortable with that. Now the D-pad, it's almost perfect. I feel like it could go with like a little tiny bit more pivot. Like I wish that there was a little tiny bit more pivot there, but overall it feels fine. I never really have to worry about things. D-pad, or excuse me, the face buttons, they feel small. Now, I don't know if it's just because I have a big thumb, but when you compare it to other face buttons on DualSense or Xbox Series X or the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally, they're just much larger. So this just feels much smaller, but because of the real estate that's here, that's available in terms of button placement and ergonomics, I understand why they went that route. Now, the shoulder buttons or the triggers that are here, they're there. You can just go ahead and push them down. So when it comes to everything all the way up to, I would say, PlayStation 1, feels fine. You don't have to worry about it, and everything just kind of like works. But when you go into the Gamecube or the well, I guess PS2 also works too, but the Gamecube era, where you need to have kind of like an analog trigger there, that's where things kind of get a little wonky, because you're going to either push down the button 100% or not at all. So if you're playing Super Mario Sunshine, for instance, that's where things kind of just fall apart in terms of the emulation. Now there are ways where you can set up the emulators so that you have several options, but right out of the box, you're just going to be feeling a little bit weird when it comes to that. Now, aside from that, all of the other buttons that are here, they feel fine. Like there's a home button that's here that's very clicky. I don't know if it'll pick it up, but that's super clicky when it comes down to it. The select and start buttons feel fine. And then the power buttons, as well as the volume rocker, is nice. But the cool thing I thought was really awesome is that there's actually a button that is here that's dedicated to launching the Anbernic front end. Let's see if it'll go ahead and focus. There we go. And then boom, it just goes ahead and put like just anytime. You can just go ahead and boot it up and it just works, which I think is pretty cool, because if you want to go onto the Android side and you want to play some of the Android games that are there and then launch your retro collection, then you have that option, which is pretty nifty in the grand scheme of things. Now, this unit did not come with a microSD already in there with a ton of games. This is just my collection that I have, and I just put that on there. But there are options for you to buy it with a ton of games that are there. Audio on this handheld is interesting because they are downward firing speakers on the handheld, but they're loud enough to where it's kind of okay, and they almost get too loud, which is definitely something that, I mean, depending on who you talk to, might be just fine, to the point where it's not even that big of a deal. But for a lot of people, it's just something that might throw them off. Like if I go ahead and I put this on max, you should be able to kind of like hear how it's coming. And for downward firing speakers, they're not bad. Personally, I'm not a fan of any type of speaker that is pointing up, down, left, right. It has to be pointing directly at me in order for it to be, a viable speaker. But these are so loud and clear, that's important, loud and clear, to the point to where I'm kind of okay with it, which is definitely something that I did not expect at all. Now, one of the things that I did want to go ahead and talk about is the fact that a lot of the specs that are here, a lot of the hardware that is here is shared or similar to other pieces of tech that Anbernic has released. For instance, the Gamecube as well as the R556. In terms of system on a chip or SoCs, it's pretty much the same. You're looking at Unisoc T820, which, you know, if you've seen reviews of the RG556 as well as the Gamecube, then you know more or less the performance that you're going to expect out of this handheld. One of the main differences is the fact that the screen size is just different overall. So I think that in terms of performance, you're going to see something similar that in terms of what you would see with the Gamecube more than the 556. But that being said, the same chipset is there, so you're going to go ahead and experience that more or less the same across the board. But another differentiating factor that I think is somewhat similar to the Gamecube is the fact that the screen is there. Now, in terms of resolution, the resolution is probably the best thing that I've seen so far, but let's go ahead and talk about all of the specs that are there. So you have the Unisoc T820 SoC as well as the Mali G57, then 8 gigabytes of LPDDR4X RAM, and it comes with 128 gigabytes of storage as well as the microSD card slot for either expansion of memory, or you can just use that to put the games that you're going to play on this handheld. Then there's the 4-inch IPS screen that is 960 by 720. That's a 4:3 aspect ratio, and as far as I know, this might be the highest resolution that I've seen out of any Anbernic handheld. I could be wrong, but if I am, let me know in the comments. I'd love to go ahead and see what else is out there. Now, in terms of connectivity, you have 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi as well as Bluetooth 5.0, and this is running Android 13. In terms of battery, it does have a 5500 milliamp hour battery. So depending on what you're going to be playing, you might see anywhere between 3-ish hours to 7.5 to like 8 hours. Again, depending on the math that I did on this, but it might be different in real world experiences. Like I said, this is a first look impressions, and I'm just looking at just the numbers and everything that's there. That being said, if you do run out of battery, that's where today's sponsor Ugreen comes into play with their new battery line. One of the biggest drawbacks with handheld gaming overall is running out of power whenever you're out and about. And sometimes you might run out of power and not be nearby a power outlet, or you might not have the right AC adapter or whatever it may be to charge your handheld. This is where Ugreen's Nexode power banks come into play. This specifically is their 20,000 milliamp hour, 130 watt fast charging power bank. The cool thing that I like about this is that it has up to 130 watt output with the combined ports, but there's one specific port that is 100 watts total output. And the great thing about that, and let me check my notes over here, is that you can charge an iPhone 15 by 55% or a MacBook Pro 16-inch by 43% in 30 minutes. And you can fully charge an iPhone 15 4 times. I wouldn't know that personally because I don't have a MacBook and I don't have an iPhone, but I saw similar things when it came to charging my Pixel 8 Pro. Now, that being said, it is also very light and compact, and you can take this with you traveling wherever it may be. Also, it's airline approved, so that means that you can fly with this and you don't have to worry about anything. But the cool thing that I like about this is that it has a cute little tiny face. There's a cute little design over here. I mean, would you just look at it? Would you just look at it? Now, that being said, on that display, you are going to be able to see how much battery life is left on this thing, how much power is left, but you can also see the overall power output on each of the ports, which is really cool. So you can keep, you know, an eye on things and you can know whether or not something is charging properly or not at all. Now, Ugreen has been a longtime sponsor of this channel, and the more that I've worked with them, the more that I've seen that their products are continuously improving and becoming better and better and better. Their entire Nexode line is just awesome overall. If you're interested in getting your own power bank, follow the link in the description below or the pinned comment. And thanks to Ugreen for sponsoring this video. So with the Unisoc T820, it's just something that's very similar to what we've seen in the past. So you're going to know more or less the performance that you're going to get out of this handheld. Now, in terms of 8-bit, 16-bit, even some 32-bit games, everything just works, which is absolutely awesome. Most of it is going to be running through RetroArch, or is it RetroArch or RetroArch? Let me know in the comments. But in terms of that, it's going to be running through RetroArch without any issues at all, and it's just going to work. It's really where you're gonna see performance dips when you're talking about PS2, GameCube, some Wii titles are there, and in terms of the overall appeal of everything that's there, it really just depends on what you want to go ahead and experience on here. But in terms of price to performance, there really isn't much else that's out there that will hit the same numbers that this has hit in terms of an overall experience as well. Now, I do know that recently there was the RG40XX, which seems to be kind of like the swan swan song, so to speak, in terms of what everyone else is interested in. And I don't have it in my hands yet, but my assumption is that this compared to that, it's kind of like a DMG versus like I don't know, like a Sega Game Gear from that time in terms of like size difference, because this is just such a chonky boy that it's hard to really go ahead and, you know, compare the two. But in terms of like performance and everything like that, that's kind of like what's there. Now, in terms of software, there are a lot of things that are here that are they definitely are worth mentioning. First and foremost, this is Android. So a lot of the things that you're going to go ahead and see are very similar to any other Android device that is out there. Like I mentioned earlier, there is an RG launcher. Now you can go ahead and push that and it'll just come up. Obviously, you can also push that button that I mentioned earlier and it'll just get rid of it. But there are other things as well that you can kind of look into. For instance, there is this button that is right here that is for key mapping. Now, I don't have Genshin Impact downloaded on here, but my assumption is that it will go ahead and just allow you to map things. The one thing that I noticed on here, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, is the touchscreen not being as good as I would like. I'll talk about that later on when I talk about different emulators and things like that. But in terms of Android and everything else that's here, you can change out the different modes that are here for an Xbox mode or a Nintendo Switch mode for the face button layout. What I've noticed is that if I switch to Xbox mode and I restart the handheld, it'll revert back to that Nintendo Switch mode. So it just seems like that's just the preferred method on things. Then from there, there is different options for ambient lighting and everything if you wanted to change things. And there is a deeper mode of going into that in the settings menu. The fan is set to auto automatically, but if you wanted to change things, you can. As far as I can tell, the only time I heard this kick on was when I was playing PS2 games, and it really isn't that loud overall, so you don't really have to worry too much about things. Now, if we go to settings and we go all the way down to where are we? Handheld game console. This is where you can kind of configure a little bit more. For example, the ambient light, if you wanted to change different settings, if you wanted it to be brighter, faster, slower, whatever, it'll just work as is. Same thing with like fan configuration. If you wanted to go deeper on that, you could. Quick launcher, it'll go ahead and just open this automatically. And then there is a key tester that is here. So if you wanted to test out different things, you'll be able to see how that would work on things, which is pretty cool. It's just, you know, trying to see everything that's there and the start and select button and whatnot, which it's a nice to have. It's a nice to have. And in terms of like the joysticks, there's different joystick configurations as well as calibrations. So if you wanted to calibrate this, you could. Again, I like the fact that all of that is kind of just like baked in, which makes things a little bit easier in the grand scheme of things. Now, as you probably already saw, there's a ton of emulators that this comes on. I do not know if these are paid for. I do not know if this is just scraped off the internet and you know, called a day. This does also come with the Play Store. So if you connect that to your Google account or your Gmail account, from there you can load in any apps or any emulators that you've paid for or any services like that. Like if you have Emulation Station, for instance, you can use that instead of the RG launcher that's here. Same thing goes for Daiji Show. If you have Daiji Show, you can use that instead. So there's several options that are here. Now, one of the things that I noticed while playing PlayStation 2 is that when I wanted to adjust different settings, I really needed to like push down. And even then, like it would take a miss input. So I kind of really had to knock out where things were. So it seems like around the edges of the screen itself, there's just not as much sensitivity. Like you kind of have to really push down in some instances for things to work, which sucks in my opinion. Now I do know that this isn't Anbernic's normal shtick, that they don't typically have touchscreens that are this large or this size. So I don't know if that's just something that they just have that just didn't work, or maybe it's just, you know, a new type of screen or a new manufacturer that they're working with directly. But in terms of sensitivity, it's not there. It leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to that specifically. Like I said, you know, performance in terms of games on here seem to be just fine for the most part. It really isn't until, you know, you play some heavier PS2 titles, well, I feel like GameCube games are fine. Everything works on fine on that, but heavier PS2 titles are kind of like the moment where things kind of just go ahead and slow down. But for the most part, things just work, and that's kind of one thing that I love about this, is that I don't really have to worry too much about things running properly on here. So if you just want to get this to like play games, and you have, you know, your old retro collection saved locally, then this works just fine. You never have to worry about things. And again, this is a byproduct of things, is that your thumbs are going to go and touch here, but whatever, not a big deal. That being said, I do love the way that this is designed and that this is running. Like, things just work fine on here. Speaking of the screen, I'm not a big fan of how thick the bezels are. Now, when you look at something like the 40XX and how thin the bezels are on that, and then you compare it to something as chunky as this, it kind of just leaves a lot to be desired in terms of the overall experience. Now, I know that, you know, there is a size difference that's there, but it's still something that bears mentioning. I hope that in future iterations of whatever the V model is, that it just, you know, looks better overall and has less of a bezel, but, you know, it's just something to mention when I'm talking about this stuff. Adding games onto Anbernic's front end isn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. From time to time, as you're scrolling around, if you hit X, there's a little thing that pops up that tells you to go there, but if you hit X, it'll ask you to search the card and nothing pops up. My assumption is that the front end is looking specifically at the storage that's on board and not the actual microSD card that is installed. In order to get it to actually scan that, you have to go from platform to platform and come here and hit select. Once you hit select, this option or this menu pops up. You can either change emulator settings that are here, like the different emulators if you wanted to do a standalone versus not, and different core configurations are here as well. But if you go to ROM settings, as you can see, it's searching for the storage that's on board, and nothing is actually popping up because there isn't anything. So you want to point it to the microSD card if you have the game stored there. So you just go here, and then from there you go to the appropriate folder. Make sure that you check it, hit select, and then from there search games. It won't like confirm or anything like that, but if you go back, all the games are going to be here, and then from there all you got to do is just launch whatever it is that you want to go ahead and play, and it'll ask you whether or not you want a new game or an old game. If you had previously been playing a game, then you would want to hit old game, as that is essentially a quick save state that happens when you close. So let's say I wanted to go ahead and play a little bit. I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll hit let me go ahead and long press and go back home. Right now, if I go back to old game, it takes me back to the title screen instead of having to like do all that stuff. So this is something that if you're if you want to just use their front end, take that into account. That way you can go ahead and actually play the games that you have on your SD card. So what do you guys think of the RG406V? Is this something that you're going to be getting for yourself? Are you interested in something like this, or are you just going to miss it out entirely? Let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. And let me know what you guys think of this whole first look idea. Personally, I prefer to do more in-depth reviews, but this came in yesterday, and I do know that pre-orders start today. Well, at the time of this recording, 9/19. So let me know what you guys think about it. And if you're interested in hearing about the R36S, which is something that I mentioned in this video, then click this video over here. And if you want to hear my thoughts on the Anbernic RG28XX, then click this video over here. And until next time, guys, I will see you on the next one. Peace.